Good evening, viewers, and thank you for joining us on this week's last segment. We are going to go over to Ukraine and talk about the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, once destroyed in the 1980s, again, apparently destroyed. And some of our panel members have different opinions about how dangerous it really is. But to take us away, our very own Tracy Wilbert.
On April 26, 1986, at 1:23 a.m. local time, the number 4 reactor in Chernobyl, Ukraine, which was at the time in the USSR, exploded. There have been a number of documentaries and books and series on the event, which I encourage you all to look into if you're interested. In December of the same year, work was completed on a sarcophagus of sorts intended to contain the spread of radioactive contamination from the site, and from 2016 to 2018, construction began and was completed on a massive Quonset-shaped containment vessel over Reactor 4. And on February 14th of this year, a Russia-controlled drone struck that containment vessel with explosives, damaging the vessel and potentially endangering all of us. This story is from Reuters by Yurii Kovalenko on April 13th, 2025. I don't know how to say that word right. That's why I said it weird.
Reuters?
Reuters? Reuters.
We got one of those is right.
Yeah. Well, we should just say it every way we can imagine and then find out which one is right and clip that one. And just play it with the video. Nobody will
find out.
Yeah, none the wiser. Anyway, thank you for that wonderful and insightful introduction. You know, I want to know, how important is this really? Tracy, what are your thoughts on why this was struck on Valentine's Day of all places, of all days, by the way? But this being struck particularly, I think it's got more impacts than just maybe a functional one. You know, what are your thoughts on why it was hit?
It's really hard to say. To say because I don't see any communication. I read the article and I really didn't see any communication except from Maria Zakharovka. She called the incident a provocation. I don't know. What are they trying to do? They trying to let out the radiation? Because if they breach the inner sarcophagus, then there is a threat of radioactive material being spread. Right now, just the damage to the overarching container, we're really okay. But if they breach the inner sarcophagus, that is basically just a whole bunch of plates on the actual reactor building itself, then there's a threat. There's birds could come down and pick up some radioactive material, fly it somewhere. It could be blown away by the wind. It could be rained and then rained on and get into the groundwater. There are subterranean defenses against that, but it is a provocation. It sort of shows to me that they're gonna stop at nothing and get their way and to get what they want. And if that means they have to, spread radioactive material, then that's what they're gonna do.
And just to clarify for all of our viewers, Maria Zakharovka is a Russian politician, serves as the director of information and press department. So probably like our press secretary is, but the press secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia. And so on that note, I would say at first glance, this looks hazardous to me. Chernobyl has been closed off since the 1980s, regardless of the fact that the Minister of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources in Ukraine, by the name of Svetlana Hrinchuk, says that, for many years, the exclusion zone has needed to be transformed into a zone of renewal, and that this territory is like no other in Ukraine and is suitable for developing renewable energy projects. I having not that much background on nuclear energy and maybe the engineering that goes into a facility like this, is a little bit surprised to hear about this. And I know EJ wants to talk about it so bad, which is why I'm going to go to Rob next, because I can see EJ squirming in his seat, cracking his neck, and I know that he's got a lot to say. So Rob, what is the significance of this? Maybe, some of the details about it. They used a high explosive warhead. Was it necessary to hit this? Who's right? Is it Russia? Is it Ukraine? And what are your thoughts on this whole ordeal?
So, I like tangents, and then I'll loop back around, I promise, because it kind of reminds me of like anytime my dad and I would watch something and it's like Finding Bigfoot, and they never do, and because if they did, we'd hear about it in the news. We are not being bombarded by constant warnings of imminent global destruction, so it's probably okay. But that's kind of not the point, because it honestly makes me think of domestic violence, where it's like, if you punch a wall, what you're doing is you're demonstrating that you can be violent. It's kind of like putting your finger out and being like, I'm not touching you. Well, in this case, I did touch you, but it was just for a second. Like, it's the attack was intentional. I was actually curious about that. The article didn't say, so I went out looking for another one. And the New York Times said, quote, "The breach was also deliberate." They said that it punched right through at 1:59 a.m. on Friday by a Russian drone with a high explosive warhead. So it's just, the attack was a message. They meant to say something. It's the only thing this could mean, because otherwise they were, hoping to actually cause catastrophic danger, which I really doubt they're trying to do, because they're right next to the problem. So this is just this is posturing, and it's dangerous.
Yep. I agree, and I think that Russia in this conflict is trying to tell people, look, take us seriously. We will enact more dangerous attacks. This is just an example of one. And the reason why it can be perceived as dangerous is because so many of us who are used to hearing the age-old adage, I guess, or example of Chernobyl being a really dangerous place, think automatically, whoa, there was an attack on it. We must be in grave danger. And I think most of the world thinks that. And Russia wants to be taken seriously. EJ, without further ado, please talk to us about the attack on Chernobyl.
I wanted more ado.
He couldn't take it anymore. His head would explode.
Go ahead.
No, you're not wrong on that. So I want to say, don't panic. The new safe containment zone, the big arch that is over the sarcophagus in Reactor 4, was breached. However, it's not as bad as a lot of sites make out to be. As mentioned, the new safe confinement zone houses the sarcophagus, a heaping behemoth of concrete and steel, to shield the unit number 4, which had unfortunately the biggest meltdown of a single nuclear reactor ever recorded. Many would lead you to believe this is an unforeseen disaster, but it isn't. The NSC has had protocols for a breach ever since it was constructed, and even before. It's held under a negative pressure inside to avoid any particles leaving in case of a breach. And to further the issue, the inner containment, so the NSC has 2 layers, outer one was breached, inner one wasn't. So there is no threat of anything leaving as of yet. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has continued to monitor both inside and outside. And there's no spikes, even minor, in radiation levels beyond what is expected at Chernobyl. And the scientists who work inside the new safe containment zone and the IAEA are supremely confident that it won't fail. I feel we should be too, because as members of the public, we tend to freak out with nuclear energy a lot because of things like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. In this case, I feel that the anxiety will do more than the attack did, because it was most likely posturing. However, I would like to point out what you were saying about turning Chernobyl into a renewable energy site can be done, and hopefully will, once the war is over. So Chernobyl might be some hope for the future.
Well, I think that statement is probably meant as a bit of a reassurance to people who are concerned over the attack on Chernobyl, right? For a leader to come out and say, hey, look, we can actually develop this land. Like, we are not concerned. The thing is, though, EJ, what you basically just laid out also states or gives the idea that there could be potential for a worse fallout, right? This attack didn't do anything, but a further attack, we don't know what the fallout for that could be, right? And I think that Russia used the high explosive warhead because it sounds a hell of a lot more dangerous than, let's say, a penetrator warhead, right?
Yeah.
Something that could have gone through the second layer and really done some damage, made a crater, and really spread that nuclear material into the atmosphere and deeper underground, affecting water sources, things like that. So I think Russia probably knew what it was doing, probably had ideas about the design of that facility and said, hey, what can we do to put anxiety, put fear into the global population, particularly the Ukrainians themselves, without actually doing anything. I know, a high explosive warhead. I remember, being the former intelligence analyst that I am, being a young intelligence analyst in school and coming up with these concepts and then briefing them to my instructors and saying, hey, they used a high explosive warhead, thinking that was so bad. And then my instructor saying, okay, what's that mean? And I'd have to go, I don't know. I think that most of the world is probably in an I don't know phase, and we're not really sure how to take this. We just think that we're supposed to take it really seriously. And I think that Russia succeeded there.
I'm 100% with you.
So on that note, I want to go back. Tracy, I want to talk to you about, putting aside all of this messaging, maybe the psychological operations that the Russians are carrying out. What do you think is happening here? I mean, according to what you discussed leading up to tonight's show, I see some thoughts that you have about it, and I'd like to know, where you're at.
So we've been there's this concept that everybody knows, not everybody, but generally everybody knows about, called mutually assured destruction. That's what keeps the big countries from launching their nuclear warheads, which is the idea that if one of us fires, we're all screwed. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I see is with Ukraine, with Chernobyl. If they damage it significantly enough for it to matter, it's going to affect everybody within thousands of miles. It's not just going to affect them. And so I find this to be a threat on par with threatening, with sending an empty ICBM to just impact. Mm-hmm. It's saying, hey, we didn't do anything this time, but I'm just showing you how willing I am to just screw everyone over to get my way. Mm-hmm. If I had my way, I would have called it a war crime, but I wasn't there for the Geneva Convention. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And Rob, on that note, please feel free to lay out any opinion you have thus far. But I would like to know, being that we are the nonprofits, how does this relate to our mission here? Do you think that there could be a religious factor, or maybe just a political one, or is it just a messaging factor? How do you think this falls into what we do here?
Well, I think in the notes that I took for this, I talked about salting the earth, which is, invading another land and then destroying it so thoroughly that if you don't annex it back, then no one else can live there. And we live in a nuclear age. So this seems like an extremely efficient way to salt the earth and utterly destroy your enemies if you wish. However, it's kind of like a lame answer, but yes, there's religion attached to this just because most people are religious. Mm-hmm. And one of the primary conflicts that we ever had with Russia was ideologically capitalist versus communism, and thus fueled through the Christianity versus the atheism, as we had talked about previously. So it's not really possible to talk about it without religion informing that discussion a little bit, but it's primarily political. We don't like what is happening is bad. War bad, I think, is a pretty safe thing to say in general. So I think most people would say that violence in any circumstance can be justified given the circumstances that surround it. this doesn't exclude wars. There are wars for just reasons. This isn't necessarily one of them. So clearly they need to do something. So using attacks as purely demonstrative ways of, hey, look what we could do to you, as Tracy said, is in some ways to me it's worse. It's horrifying. Like it's not just we're trying to achieve our goal of whatever the war is about. It's so much more insidious because there's messaging, and that's the thing that gets to me.
Yeah,
It's terrorism.
absolutely. So I want to harp on both of those things. So first of all, I want to give a tidbit of information about the religious aspect of how this conflict started. So the Russian Orthodox Church kind of has its, I'm not an expert on it, so the terminology is going to be a little bit vague, but let's say is headquartered in Moscow, which it is. I don't know if they have exactly a pope or they have some kind of higher person, right? But in the Russian Orthodox Church, they are the top of the hierarchy for their religion. Ukraine has its own Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but it used to, prior to this war, connect to the church in Moscow through a hierarchy, right? So it was Moscow and then it was Kiev. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church leading up to the war decided that they were no longer going to be aligned with the Russian Orthodox Church. So there was a schism and they separated. And that was a way of kind of discrediting Russia, discrediting the culture, the overall society by pulling away and separating from it. And I think that was a way of a justification for Russia to kind of come in and do what they did. And so not a lot of people know that. I think that's interesting. I don't know how impactful it actually was, but I think in this case, the church did in Ukraine all that they could. And basically it was to pull away and then a war resulted. So you can tell the story certainly that way. But Rob, to your point, and to the point that I think all of us have made, showing what they could do, what they'd be willing to do, this also leads to a desensitization, if you will. Like if we see them attack a nuclear facility and nothing happens, maybe we'll think less of the next time they try to do that or carry out something a little bit more egregious or more dangerous, and we will be slower to act. For example, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility that has been a hotbed for conflict throughout this war, except the Russians have actually taken great steps to protect that facility and not damage it. And the sources for that are the BBC and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, if anybody wants to go look up that information. So on that note, and EJ, with your love for all things nuclear, what do you think about Russia's position moving forward? Is this just an example of what they're willing to do? Can we expect, do you think, more of the same or worse?
So, not particularly early in the war, but a year in, there was attacks on active nuclear power plants. And part of that was Ukraine was very good at taking out mid-level leadership. People like lieutenants and few officer ranks up from there. And because of that, we were seeing a lot of, in captured Russian orders, we were seeing a lot of things like, hey, disrupt the power, but no specific plan of how to do that. So people were attacking plants. The thing people need to know about nuclear power plants is that they are designed for the worst case scenario. They are designed to contain explosions, which we would struggle to replicate with conventional explosives. So even conventional missiles like Hellfires don't do anything to containment buildings. We've seen that in the war while one was being bombarded. So Russia going after Chernobyl, I feel, is in part structuring, but also it may be them trying to say that, well, if we can't get your active ones, we'll get one that was disabled. However, they are also in their eagerness to show off how destructive they can be. They're also very much underestimating the staff at the NSC, because the staff since the start of the war have prepared for something like this, and they have multiple stages in place for breaches so that nothing is leaked. And having seen interviews with them, they are more than willing to get dosed with radiation if it means protecting the environment and the locals who live near the
Well, EJ froze, but Tracy, you can go ahead and take over.
Well, I had a question for EJ, but my or maybe it was just a comment, but I don't know how good that's gonna do if they just boom the entire site. Yeah. Who's there to help if everybody is ash? Like that's my biggest concern, because they're a very wealthy country. They can make the whole place a parking lot if they really wanted to.
And that would require an escalation of force, an escalation of weapons that they haven't demonstrated a use of yet in this conflict, and that would change the game. I think that attacking Chernobyl, at least again in the minds of people, is probably an escalation for most of us, right? Or most of the societies in the world. When they see Chernobyl being attacked, I think they say, wow, this is an escalation, while the Russians probably know this isn't quite an escalation, but it is a successful message. But yeah, I do think that they have the ability to definitely inflict more damage, and that's what's scary. I don't know if this Chernobyl attack is a warning or if it's some kind of other play. I don't want to find out, though. And on that note, Rob, I'm going to go ahead and leave it to you to take us away before we wrap up.
No, that's definitely just kind of where I'm at, because we've talked about how it's posturing, how it's clearly a message, and that's the part where I just struggle for words, because they clearly did not mean to do more damage. So what did they mean?
Yeah,
it's just questions. I genuinely wonder. I'm curious about what Ukraine and their people are being told and how they're handling it themselves, because they clearly are far closer to it than we are. There's just it feels like it's left us with questions, which is the point, I guess. Sure. So here I am questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. EJ, while you were gone, Tracy had maybe a comment or a question for you, and Tracy, if you want real quick to just kind of relay that to him.
Yeah, what good are these measures if everybody there gets suddenly turned to ash?
So, if it would take a hell of a strike to do that.
Yeah.
We talked about this, the need for a significant escalation of force in order to do that. So, on that note.
If somehow, let's say, a series of unfortunate events happened, and something happened in which all the workers inside the NSC were to perish in an attack, there is emergency fire crews who are trained to deal with breaches. In fact, they responded to the initial breach. They are stationed on site, and they have not only learned from what we do today with nuclear power plants, but they also learned from the initial 1986 tragedy, in which multiple fire crews, due to a lack of training and proper equipment, were a bit ineffective.
I guess my only concern is that I feel, and maybe I'm just coming from a position of emotion, which is entirely possible, but I just think that we're not dealing with a chimpanzee with an assault rifle. We're dealing with a Planet of the Apes chimpanzee with an assault rifle,
with a nuclear weapon. With
nuclear weapons, yeah. You saw how mean those chimpanzees in Planet of the Apes were. Come on, we gotta head this off. These people are dangerous, and I'm not ready to deal with it.
I should say there should absolutely be more defenses around Chernobyl MPP. I just do also want to reassure people that it would take a lot of things going wrong at the same time for anything to pose a danger to the outside world.
That's good.
Which hopefully doesn't happen.
So speaking of defenses, I just want to leave our viewers with this. If you were to, and I have a military background, so I kind of know some of the key phrases to look for, but if you wanted to look up something called a disposition of forces, on Google. Like I said, the CSIS, the Council of Foreign Relations is a good source. They have a global conflict tracker that tells you all about, kind of the status of forces to the max extent possible that they can provide information. They can show you maybe where some missile systems, defensive systems are between the two countries if you're interested in looking into maybe the status of the war. But yeah, the CSIS and the CFR.org are also good sources. And with that, I would just say, on the little factoid that I gave earlier about the schism between the Ukrainian Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox churches, I almost wonder if that schism never took place. Could they more successfully negotiate with each other? Could the soft power between these two diplomatic tools, the churches, help quell this situation? I'm not so sure. But it's interesting to think about and maybe worth some research. So I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us this week. We had a really eclectic mixture of topics and a lot of good discussions. I hope everybody enjoyed it. You enjoy the rest of your weekend, and make sure you keep tuning in to the Nonprofits. You can even click one of the links below to keep watching.